Hello, Heather Hoffman here today, and I have a fun technique to share with you using Pretty Pink Posh's beautiful background stencils and some Gina K glitter glitz gel, and two different ways to kind of use them together. We're going to be using the tropical background and the birthday background stencils, and one of them we're going to use the turquoise glitter gel, and the other one we're going to use the white, but we're going to add some distress inking and kind of do some extra layers on that one. So I'm starting off here with the birthday background, and we're going to use this with the turquoise glitter gel. I'm using a little bit of tape on the back of my panel of white cardstock just to hold the stencil in place. This is purple tape. You can use washi tape or painter's tape or post-it tape. This is just one of my favorite ways to kind of hold stencils in place. On the second card, I'm going to show you another way that you could do on either or both of these cards. I'm starting off with a palette knife here, and when I opened that glitter gel, I hadn't used it yet, so I went ahead and kind of stirred it together. It looked like there was a little bit of separation at the top. I don't know if it would have mattered, but just to be on the safe side, I gave it a good stir just to make sure the mixture was all mixed together in uniform. And then I'm just using my palette knife to smooth it over the top of that stencil. That's my preferred method. I also pulled out here at the end, this is a Thermal Web Stencil Pal. It's a big, kind of almost like a big flat squeegee is how I think of it. And it's great for these large stencils to kind of smooth out and make sure you have a nice even thin coat. The palette knife works just fine, but I decided to do this just to make sure that I had a really flat even coat with this color. It's also a great way to make sure it's not too thick over the top as well. Real quick here, I showed that stencil with the glitter all over it. I washed it off in my sink in warm water and it came nice and clean again. I just wanted to show you how easy that was to clean. All right, for the second card, we're going to do some stenciling with Distress Oxide first. But with these detailed stencils and using inks like this, I wanted to try out my Pixie spray on it. I've used this a few times, and it's a great way to hold your stencils in place, really simple, while you do your design work. I put a light little coating of on it with a box that I use to protect my work surface, and then I set it aside to dry for just about 5 minutes. It probably didn't even need that long, but I wanted to make sure it had dried well. And it's a great repositionable, so when you put it on, it'll work to hold your stencil in place, but it'll peel off really easy as well, kind of like a sticker. So I'm going to go ahead, now that I have that in place on my panel of white cardstock, you can notice it holds it fully in place. I didn't have to add any tape or anything. And I'm going to use a mixture of Distress Oxide inks and my blending brushes just to kind of do a gradient color on that background. The great fun thing with these background stencils is the part that stencils out that's covered is very small. So it almost gives the appearance of pattern paper when you're all finished. I love that about these, how it just gets such a well-covered pattern and background on here. All right, I've added my first 3 colors here, and at the end I decided it needed one more color, so I just kind of pulled some purple out as well. The 4 colors I'm using on this are Cracked Pistachio, Dried Marigold, Abandoned Coral, and that final one was Wilted Violet. And I'm using blending brushes. You can use your favorite tool for blending those inks. Now before I move or peel off this stencil, I'm going to do the same thing and stir up my white Glitz glitter gel. And this is almost a clear sparkly, it's not opaque, it's kind of just once it dries you can see through it. It looks opaque as you put it on, but once it dries you'll be able to see all that lovely bright color through, and it's going to add lots and lots and lots of fun sparkle. So I made sure I had a good coating on everything here. And one thing I did different on this, you notice on the last card I put all my excess back into my jar. Well, if you look at this as I scrape it off, you'll notice there's some color coming off from the Distress Oxide. So I didn't put that back in because I didn't want to mess up my white color of my extra. So I would just be nice and careful not to put any more on than you have to, because of course you don't want to waste it. But then you peel that off. See how well that Pixie spray held that in place. All right, I set those aside. This is them all dried nice and thoroughly. I gave them a good hour or two. I don't remember exactly how long, but I just waited till they felt dry to the touch from the front and back. Now I'm going to add some die cuts to the front. I've already die cut a couple of those panels, and I'm quickly trimming off all 4 edges of those panels, just 1/8 of an inch on each side. This is going to help them fit on my white card bases a little bit better, and it also kind of evens up any crooked edges. And then these 2 shaker dies that I used, one of them's the balloon shaker and one of them's the Aloha shaker. I want to back them with a little bit of vellum because with all that glitz and glitter there. Those sentiments are a little too fine and detailed. They didn't show up as much as I wanted. So I have just some pieces of vellum that I'm going to add some torn edges just wide enough to go behind those words to really make those pop. I liked vellum because it didn't really cover up any of those backgrounds because I didn't really want to hide them. They're so pretty and sparkly, and I didn't want to waste any of that effort there. So the vellum was the perfect way just to kind of make that sentiment pop a little bit, but still let that background show through. My favorite way to attach vellum, especially when I've done torn edges and I'm adhering a strip like this, is once I get it down to the right width, I wrap it around the front of the card and just fold it over to the back. That way, when I know where I want it, I can just adhere it on the back and I don't have to worry at all about any of my adhesive showing from the front. It's a great way to do that because that's the trickiest part about vellum, I think. All right, I'm using some good sturdy tape there. This is Scor-Tape. I use it quite a bit with vellum and heavier panels and watercolor. So I'm just adding a tiny bit behind those folded over pieces on the back, and you can see just how well that holds that in place. Repeating that for the other one, the same thing. And then before I finish adhering everything on there, I have some little add-on sentiments I wanted to add underneath. I'm using Party Friends and Tropical Birds for those little extra sentiments. And I'm going to heat emboss them on black cardstock with white. It's a fun way to just make those little sentiments kind of pop and stand out. I love white on black. Something about just the contrast, and I think it's a little unexpected because it's easy to stamp black on white cardstock, but heat embossing in white on black is just one extra step above that just kind of adds to your design just a little bit. So I stamped those both. I used my powder tool to keep my embossing powder from sticking to stray areas there, and then I stamped with my clear embossing ink, and I still had a fingerprint there, so I just used a clean dry brush to brush off that excess embossing powder. And then I can heat set that with my heat gun. And then I went ahead and pulled my paper trimmer out once these were heat embossed, and I trimmed those down just to little tiny squares there. You can see I didn't figure I needed to share all of that. It's a little bit of a just fiddly process of cutting that down. All right, I'm going to adhere those panels onto my white card bases. You can see how there's a small white border around from when I trimmed that little extra off at the a little earlier in the card making process. Now I'm using some liquid glue to adhere these in place, and I put just a little bit around the outside and then tiny little dots on just some of the little corner and wider points in those words, just enough to hold it in place. And once I put it on there, I realized it was really only going to adhere to the vellum. So when I moved over to the Aloha die, I only put it on the sides there, right where it was going to touch the vellum, and then a little tiny bit across those words. I like liquid adhesive because it's easy to just put a little tiny bit where you need it, and then it's going to kind of slide into place, and once it dries, it'll be nice and solid and sturdy on those. All right, and then the little add-on sentiments, I'm going to go ahead and use foam adhesive to put those in place, just to pop them up for a tiny bit of dimension. And I love how that kind of completes those larger word sentiments on there. These dies are super fun for shakers, but they're also fun just freestanding on their own like this. They make a great focal point on a card like this. All right, one final touch. I grabbed a little bit of jute twine, and I'm just going to tie that on the bottom of my balloon. What's a balloon without a little bit of a string or a bow on it, right? And this is a good simple way. It's kind of neutral. It doesn't stand out and draw too much attention, but it's just a great finishing touch hiding on there. All right, there we go. Two great fun ways to make sparkly backgrounds using Pretty Pink Posh's background dies, and a couple different options with the glitter gels, using them on their own with the colors, or doing some distress inking on the background and putting the white gel over the top. Thanks so much for coming by. Have a wonderful day.